All right, in the past couple of weeks, we actually got a really nice introduction to HBD, Human BioDiversity. The idea is simple, it's just that people as groups operate differently because their bodies and their entire humanity, their entire biology is diverse, both intragroup and intergroup. Oh boy, as I'm banging this mic. Anyway, regardless, John Carter did a nice fun overview of this. It gets people where they can sort of understand the idea, drop the external pressures, and just try and understand what's being expressed here. Now, we'll start with the ugly part first. When he drew up this idea, he jumped in and he spread everything out over the 3d6, the sort of bell curve that you can get within D&D, and he used the standard, the original application of the stats. So you've got character, wisdom, excuse me, not character as much as charisma, wisdom, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence. He spread those out, made himself a diagram of a bunch of different people groups, and you can go through this thread, see the methodology and how he built this. He depended on grok and depended on different stats, and it's all just for fun. This is entertainment purposes, but in this entertainment, it shows the idea of HBD and digs into how we could potentially be evaluating and see if this matches our view, sort of the a priori idea that different groups of people are different. That's all that's being said. It's not one is better than the other, blah, blah, blah. Situation depends. So, anyway, if we start digging into this, again, the ugly part, here's your average line at 0. This is baseline. And you can see different groups summing for all ability modifiers coming over to roughly -20. I want to say within his model that's 3 standard deviations. I might be wrong. Off the top of my head, I'm terrible with statistics, but I can kind of sort of handle them. So anyways, we'll go through here. Like I said, he built on 3d6, 3-sided die, which are, golly, 3 6-sided die. Bear with me. So over here, you can see his table, 3d6, giving a total of 216 combinations. Again, here's going to be your average. 0, your baseline. All right, the parators, again, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, charisma, wisdom. He goes on a little bit of a tangent. It explains exactly what's going on with the races outside of human within D&D. This might be more fun for the people who actually jump into D&D and run with that. But then since the standard deviation on a 3d6 roll is close to 3, we see that the demi-humans in D&D don't actually differ that much from humans. Now this is good because it's explaining already with the demi-humans how close within D&D these stats are and how similar in operation they are with a baseline human. Let's see. Implying the creature the size of a child is only a little bit weaker than adult human male, but of course game designers don't want any of the races to be overpowered or underpowered in various areas. So this is also why the ability modifiers tend to balance with advantages and disadvantages, summing to 0. Baseline. Okay, IQ follows Gaussian distribution, mean of 100, standard deviation 15. Oh, damn it. So he goes into more of the methodology. He goes into how he applied grok, why he used it, and what the particular caveats were in the production of this. It's a beautiful thread. Gives you a lot of ideas jumping in. So this thread is only the Cliff Notes version. Go dig into his account. He's always posting something interesting, something that's going to get the wheels turning and potentially operates as an introduction to a good idea or an explanation. He's one of those guys that does a good thing of expanding an idea, making it accessible and contextualizing it. All right, ability modifiers were determined based on difference in each group baseline. Gets into skeletal structure, what some of this would mean. And then, again, jumps into the methodology of how he applied Grok, saying that he started each instance completely new using a similar prompt. Because one of the issues, and you'll see if you've messed with it, he goes on to talk about this. If you are continually spinning in the same instance with Grok, it starts to build off of the prior conversations and output that it's had, and it condenses the model rather than being a fresh start and having a complete view of everything that could be going on. All right, so we jump in here. He's got another table here for us, and he'll do this in each of the different areas, and he'll run over what Grok was outputting as a particular strength within the groups. He's showing what the baseline, the mean, and then again, particular groups up here. These aren't rated by where they stand within a particular category. These actually, he keeps them constant so that when you get to a new category, whether it's strength or charisma, you can see where this particular group is located. So white men and white women always up top, Ashkenazi always at bottom. Not because anything is being said there, but so that you can actually pay attention into the output and what he's telling us. Strength differences are mainly sexual dimorphism. Within a given race, there's a 6 or 7 point strength difference between males and females. So much for Valkyrie girl bosses and chainmail bikinis. Again, go up and he's going to tell you in there how his methodology, what the caveat to it is, and how the game sort of influenced the output that we're seeing. And the big one being men and women and how that operates within D&D compared to realistic. You move in here, dexterity. What I really appreciate about this, and you can get this from the source books and running into this, but here in this thread, we have collated this idea of what the stats meant and how they could be applied and what it would mean if this idea was overlaid, how people exist naturally within the world. We're going to get in here in a minute into what causes people to act like this. If this is the presentation of HBD, how a group of people act, if that is the presentation of their internal HBD, what were the factors that produced that? A lot of people want to say nothing produced that. The only thing that produced was evolution up to the shoulders. It never extended past that. Now, I'm not a strict evolutionary guy, and so that plays into my biases, into what I think HBD means, both from a foundational sense and a presentation. But I think it's ignorant for us to completely disqualify evolution, any sort of adaptation, mentally, brain structure, because it's not polite to the whole tabula rasa mindset. Tabula rasa being the blank slate. So keep jumping in here. He's going to explain all of this. He's going to explain Constitution. He's going to keep employing a bunch of different D&D graphics. And he's going to move through the different people groups. On this one, for example, we've got Constitution. And we see up here, white men, again, because that's just the order. This isn't going off of who's the best. He puts the order, and you could jump in here and see, well, the marathon time for the whites, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. But then it's nothing compared to, black men. Congenital disease risk. You've got up here 1, so it's okay, but it's not going to be as good as, say, the East Asians. Then you come over here, ability modifier. Oh, well, Look at that. East Asians, +5 ability modifier. Now this is building off the D&D framework, and he's saying that these folks have the modifier based on the standard deviations within the 3d6, and that's the whole output of this. Let's see, and you're going to get worst over here with Aboriginal men and women. And this plays into the idea, too, of when the people groups, say post-Enlightenment, very into Middle Ages, so modern expansion. That's part of what you saw when these people were affected with different plagues, with different issues. Not that it was an intentional thing on the people groups that were exploring the world, but that in coming into contact, potentially, they're running into germs and things that they were never exposed to. And because their constitution was so low, that's potentially why they were affected as much as they were. Jump back into the thread. Intelligence, straightforward. He breaks each of these down. It tells you how he took information, put it into Grok, what Grok built off of that. So if we start wrapping this up, because I think everybody gets the general idea and how this is being presented and what's being shown here, he's going to run through the rest of the stats, and then we come right back to this table. Now, this is the summed ability modifiers. Summed ability. We get this, right? Take all 6 of these guys. You're going to see different groups are much better in some and pretty terrible in others. All right. Now, the thing about white men up here, it's sort of the most robust grouping of stats. And that's why the summed ability modifiers end up producing them here in this top area. But that's not to say that they are the highest in dexterity. They're not. You got East Asian men over here. It's also not to say that white men are the highest on intelligence. You've got Ashkenazi men down here. And so this whole area is what is the summed ability modifiers. If we want to take any one of these specs, make them individual, you're going to see different people groups in different areas. So I think it's all pretty straightforward, and it's part of the reason I don't understand the frustration on many people's parts when you start bringing up HBD. Sure, IQ isn't nonsense, but using a single factor to develop a worldview is foolish. I'll grant that. But if you're going to say IQ doesn't matter, or deny the fact that IQ is a stand-in that in general is evidencing some of the ideas in here, like the summed ability modifiers. And so IQ is sort of a cheat code. It's not a good one. It's certainly not robust enough, but it stands in and says that if a people group has such and such average IQ, we can expect to some degree these summed abilities on their part, whether it's being aware enough to stay in good health, being aware enough to say that, yes, I should be raising my children and investing in them, whether their IQ is high enough to say, oh, winter is coming, let me prepare for it. So he goes on, he gives his final thoughts on this, and he has a final observation that is probably the very best part of this entire thread. He says, a final observation. While white men are the only group with bonuses in all ability scores, they have a relative weakness in wisdom. Lower than white women, East Asians, and Ashkenazis. In the D&D system, wisdom is what protects your character from enchantments, particularly spells such as charm, which bend your character's will to another's. A race disadvantaged in wisdom is vulnerable to being enthralled by dark witchcraft, used for its ends, not its own, even used against itself. Fortunately for white people, there's no such thing as black magic, and they've certainly never been ensorcelled to work against their own interests. Beautiful little tweet there. So that's the idea of the internal expressions. And I'm saying internal because they are going to be what's inside different people groups and how that people group is going to act and interact with the external pressures that are around them. Now, the question would be, why would a particular people group act this way? I think it's obvious, but for some reason, a lot of folks say, well, we can't dig into that. Popular Level says that we're all at that baseline and nothing affected us in any way that it would carry over for generations. I reject that. I think it's ridiculous to think that Inuits living over in this particular area are going to approach the world and are going to approach storage and intelligence in the same way as somebody living in the Amazon rainforest. Seems ridiculous to me. Why? Because the groups that have evolved, adapted, lived there have different Darwinian pressures, have different external pressures that are working on them, compressing ideas, killing what doesn't work, elevating what does work. That's the only way that a people group in a particular area is going to be able to survive. Now, if we dig into another area, this is Carter. He did, again, jump through all this methodology. Go dig through that original thread. Dig through this, which was buried in, which one of those tweets was it? He goes more into his methodology. He references it in 10 out of 26. So go to that particular tweet. That'll take you into his methodology thread. Again, it's John Carter. And we remember from back there when we first started talking about this that there were separate prompts for Grok, and he built instances off of each of these ideas. Doggone it. I don't even know what to click there. Okay. So here's the next one I wanted to jump into. This thread was posted by Michael Sebastian. I want to say that he originally posted this guy, and then I followed up on it. Follow Sebastian. I'm not particularly aware of Sun, and so I've read a little bit more of his stuff yet. Don't know where I'm at with everything on it, but this is just a good one, again, to get the brain working. It's if we say that external pressures applied, what are we saying with that? Because you can't go and say that external pressures apply if you're unable to communicate what that means. What were external pressures? Well, again, it was the amount of UV you were getting. It was the weather patterns. It was the seasons related to growing, related to animal movement. It was the amount of water. It was salt water. It was fresh water. All of these things play into creating a particular people group that acts with one of the spicy words, with a particular biospirit. That biospirit is an expression of their history, of what their forefathers went through to get to the ideas that they're at right now. English common law doesn't come out of the world in general. English common law comes out of a particular history in a particular environment, not just cultural, because cultural is kind of like IQ is shorthand for scratching at the HBD ideas. Excuse me. Culture is shorthand to start scratching at the biospirit idea. And so that's why you start having different cultures, because different people have had different external pressures, and there's a je ne sais quoi that exists that makes a German identity separate from a Chilean identity. Even if they're both participating and various parts of Prussian culture, there's still going to be a different biospirit that is evidenced. And so the Japanese could take on modernism is in the span of 20 years. But that expression is still going to be a different expression than what we saw from the Dutch, from the US, and the different folks that are traveling and arguing for modernism to be taken on in the form of arms, in the form of production, in the form of trade. Okay, it was a really long intro. So this thread was just a good one to build on these ideas. And how is it that a group of Native Americans operate quite similarly to East Asians? And the general idea in here is that if you go back far enough, there is a group of common ancestors in Siberia that over ages formed an approach to the world. That approach to the world goes out into the world, into North America, into South America, in different areas. And these people operate in a similar, not necessarily the same, but a similar manner. And so one of the ways in which you can do this is you start thinking about the expansion of the Europeans into the New World. When you jump into the U.S., you're going to see Scots-Irish in a lot of the mountainous highland areas, and then coming into some of the higher humidity. You've got English Anglos on the coastlines, and they're developing on there. They're relying on salt water, and then the Germans just pushed right into the continent. They find the Great Lakes. They settle in the plains. They settle along the lakes. And everywhere in the U.S., even as much as you go down all the way to Basque and different people groups that came over from Europe, they came and they, to a great degree, replicated what they were participating in over in Europe, because that is HBD. That is their biospirit. That is the expression of their forefathers and everything that had been going on prior to them getting here. Now, ultimately, they're going to start changing it. The Germans are going to bring over big draft horses, and those horses are going to be okay to a degree within the U.S. But what happens is horse-based cities are a very small portion of the U.S. because of our time in history. And so the smaller horses are in your New England area. Bigger horses come out and they're going to be in your Midwest area. But those same horses can't compete with the lighter horses that the Scots-Irish and the Tejanos and the different groups in that greater Texas, Oklahoma beef area are using to round up their beef and interact with them. So eventually you get some heavy horses being kept, but those heavy horses are almost simply for plow, because the Shire and the Clydesdales are coming over, and those are built for wagons. They're not built so much for the plow and for working in the field, but those guys end up becoming show, and they're wagon pullers rather than plow pullers. And the Scots-Irish are like, I don't even care, just give me a good 15-hand horse because I've got cattle to move. That's why the horse culture in the U.S. now, it's not radically different, but it is different than what was going on over in Europe. And I really want to jump into halflingers right now because I speak for hours on that. I'm not going to. But you see what I'm saying is that these biospirits, they get massaged and they get moved as different people groups carrying that biospirit, carrying their forefathers, move into the world and deal with different situations and different external pressures. That's why you can find a similarity in between Native Americans North American tribal nations and groups over in Siberia, or Inuits that are further north, and groups in Siberia. This was not anything that pre-Enlightenment anybody argued over. Where you come from is who you are. Where you come from is who you are. It's how you're going to approach where you are now. That's HBD. And so the idea that a person's skin color, the easiest example, what is that telling somebody, and why would they interact with others that look like them? It's telling them that they came from similar areas, they had similar external pressures, they have a similar understanding of how to operate within those pressures. And so regardless of the wars that went on, regardless of the movements of people groups and the frustrations between the Germans and the French, between the Anglos and the various other Germanic identities, there is still, as we keep stripping away layers, there's still more similarity in their deep biospirit, their understanding and their perception of the world, than if you were to take Anglos and sub-Saharan Africans. That's all HBD is recognizing differences, history, external pressures, how people groups related to that. If you want to jump into R and K gene theory, if you want to move into civilizational cycles and how different groups of people can operate with a different cycle and a different expression of that cycle. So, anyways, let's put a bow on it. Actually, I think I just did. This is HBD. It doesn't have to be anything ugly or evil. It's just trying to understand how people operate in the world. Different groups act differently. Let's acknowledge that. And let's figure out how to best move forward as we see that. All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.